Good evening and welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Dennis Ward. First Nations leaders held a press conference in Ottawa on Wednesday to give their thoughts on the federal budget that was released the previous day. And there's clearly disappointment that this year's budget did not focus enough on Indigenous priorities. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland gave a 40-minute speech on the benefits of the 2024 budget in the House of Commons on Tuesday, but never mentioned the words Indigenous or reconciliation, and this did not go unnoticed by First Nations leaders.
And yesterday, Canadians heard how the federal government plans to spend resources for the coming months and years. Yet this process is marred by a glaring omission. And I was there yesterday to be able to hear, and I did not hear any words pertaining to reconciliation, unfortunately.
Brendan Mitchell is Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Newfoundland, who's hoping to see more of a commitment to First Nations in the budget.
I was expecting to see what I refer to as a reconciliation budget yesterday. I'll say it this way. What I expected to see was a reconciliation budget, and we did not see it. I remember being with the Prime Minister in large meeting rooms, 2 times at least, where he stated that my main or first priority as Prime Minister is into Indigenous people of this country. And I really was hoping to see more.
Last week, the Assembly of First Nations put out a report that says it will take $349 billion to close the First Nations infrastructure gap by 2030. Ottawa does pledge $918 million over 5 years to address Indigenous housing and community infrastructure, but AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak says it's nowhere near enough.
However, analyzing the budget's proposals for housing, policing, roads, and water fall far short of closing the long-standing infrastructure gaps that create so many difficulties for First Nations people.
Mohawk Council of Akwesasne Grand Chief Abram Benedict also says First Nations people can't wait for government to address the growing gap.
We're already disappointed. We see some new spending in different areas, but we know that the infrastructure in our communities continues to crumble. Overcrowding continues to be a reality for a number of our communities. Our remote communities, it's even worse.
APTN News reached out to both the Métis National Council and Inuit Tapiriq Kanatami for comment, but neither were available for on-camera interviews. Instead, both released separate statements, where MNC President Cassie Karen says she is pleased there's an investment to recapitalize Métis capital corporations, but ITK President Nathan Obed says he's disappointed that there was no money to eliminate tuberculosis by 2030. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
More bad news for the Trudeau government's embattled Métis self-government recognition legislation. The Métis Nation Saskatchewan has decided to withdraw its support for Bill C53. This leaves only the Métis Nation of Ontario and Métis Nation Alberta still supporting the proposed legislation. Here again with more is Fraser Needham.
Métis Nation Saskatchewan President Glenn McCallum says after extensive meetings earlier this week, the organization has decided to head in a different direction and negotiate directly with the federal government.
After assessing, evaluating the situation that we're in, we decided, our council decided, our government decided, no, we're going to do it alone.
Bill C53 has been mired in controversy ever since it was introduced by the federal government last year. The legislation formally recognizes Métis governments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. But First Nations in Ontario and the Manitoba Métis Federation have rallied hard against the bill because they don't see the Métis Nation of Ontario as a legitimate Métis organization. MMF representative for the Southwest region, Will Gooden, says the MNS made the right move.
Better late than never. So I'm pretty happy that there was some cooler heads in the room with Métis Nation Saskatchewan, obviously in the last few days, and that there was they saw the writing on the wall that this bill is just seeing so much opposition from across the country.
McCallum says the MNS is now confident the organization will be able to get its own self-government agreement with Ottawa.
I believe the federal government will be very supportive in regards to where we're going, and hopefully in the near future that we are going to sign our own treaty.
As for the future of Bill C53, which now sits in a House of Commons committee after passing 2 readings, Gooden had some choice words.
Bill C53 is in the coffin. It's nailed shut. It's likely got a stake through its heart and a silver bullet, and it's lowered into the ground, and the dirt is being poured on it now.
APTN News reached out to the Métis Nations of Alberta and Ontario for comment and was directed to a joint online statement which says, "Our governments wish the Métis Nation Saskatchewan well as it embarks on its continuing journey to have its self-government fully recognized." In an emailed statement, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary Anasanagar's office says, "We will continue to work with the Métis governments in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan to recognize their rights in ways that work for them and in the spirit of reconciliation." Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island has just released the tragic news that they've uncovered suspected unmarked graves from 2 different former residential schools in their territory. APTN's Tina House has the story and a warning this subject matter might be disturbing to some viewers.
The Haida First Nation says they are now part of the growing list of First Nations in Canada to discover anomalies suspected to be unmarked graves at 2 former residential schools in their territory. The name of the search project is called We Are Still Standing. Anne Atleo is the project manager. She says when the 215 possible unmarked graves were found in Kamloops, that inspired her nation to seek answers about the children who also never made it home.
Until we've done further investigation, we found more what you're referring to as anomalies in the cemetery there than is what is listed.
However, they are saying it's too early to release these numbers, and this is only phase 1 of the project.
And we may never find all of the children's remains. And because we're on islands, one of the very saddest pieces is that maybe some of their remains were brought to the ocean or brought to the lake at Christie. Because we're surrounded by water. Both of these schools were built on the islands that we live on.
First established in 1900 on Mears Island, the Christie Indian Residential School was closed in 1971. A Haida Indian Residential School opened on Flores Island in 1895 and closed in 1940. The experiences of the children who went to these schools was devastating for them and their families.
Helping to breathe life back into so we could be who we were created to be. We've heard so many stories of the language being quashed, diet, every aspect of our life was being taken away.
Kids from as far away as Washington State and northern BC were forced to attend both schools. The Haida First Nation received money from the federal government and crowdfunding for the project. They also utilized 3 types of the latest technology for their ground search, but it was challenging to find accurate records.
We had a fair bit of records we were able to secure from the United Church, but there was a lot of redacted information from the provincial archives, and it was late in securing some of the records from the oblates. It was a challenge, and now we've entered into agreements to access records that are not normally accessed by the public.
But for Anne and her team, listening to the oral evidence of those that survived these institutions was the hardest part of their work.
We heard really heartbreaking stories of hearing babies crying in the attic. Heartbreaking stories of children taken to the lake and not brought back.
Phase 2 of the project begins in the next few weeks, and for the Haida First Nation, they're determined to heal the past and remain strong while honoring their culture and traditions while uncovering the truth. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A historic signing between the Haida Nation and the province of British Columbia took place this past week. That story and more after the break. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. Single occupancy hotels across the country are often used to house those who might not be counted as homeless or living on the streets. In Winnipeg, many of those dwellings are along the iconic Main Street, including the McLaren Hotel. Built over a century ago, it is now getting a facelift to better serve its 150 residents. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Geraldine Halcrow has called the McLaren home on and off for years.
My door's broken in maybe once or twice a week. I'm a woman. I'm scared.
Despite that, Geraldine calls those that live here family. She's one of 150 residents living in this old hotel turned into single-dwelling homes. Now, thanks to the Equal Housing Initiative, this place will undergo renovations for the next 2 years, costing about $37.5 million. No one will get evicted. The renovations will happen one floor at a time. The executive director says this approach allows for some stability in the tenants' lives.
People that are dealing with mental health, with addiction, with poverty, it's a journey, right? And it's not a continuum in one direction, it's a zigzaggy line.
James Tower has lived here since 2011. The best part of the renovation for him?
They closed down the VLT lounge downstairs and the vendor too, you know.
At least half of the tenants are Indigenous. That's why a common area was vital.
To do traditional medicines if they want, to smudge.
In the meantime, other programs have started here. Every Thursday, tenants and volunteers alike prepare a hot meal and package food hampers that get delivered to every resident in the building. Michael Miner is a master's in social work student who did his placement here last summer. He still comes to cook on his own time because he believes in the holistic approach used here.
I think that the most important thing working with people who are housing insecure or don't have dependable food sources is finding ways to meet all of their needs at once. And it's programs like at the McLaren where they're making sure all of those pieces can come together.
While the inside will change a lot, the outside not so much.
The McLaren Hotel is a heritage building, so basically what you see now is what it'll still look like when renovations are done. But just a few steps over here, these buildings will be torn down to build the transition housing that will be called Recover Bridge.
They would have an option right next door. Because what we also learned from many people that live here is this is their home.
The dwellings will be more typical housing units ranging from bachelor to 1 and 2 bedrooms. Both the McLaren and Recover Bridge should be completed by summer 2026 and will be staffed 24/7. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A new Chinook salmon management agreement between the U.S. and Canada is hoping to help rebuild dwindling salmon stocks. But as Sarah Connors tells us, some tribal chiefs in Alaska are frustrated with how the agreement was reached.
For Karma Alvey, the chief of Eagle, Alaska, salmon is more than food. It's a way of life.
We're river people and salmon people. We've depended on them for, thousands of years.
Chinook salmon are the heartbeat of the Yukon River, which runs through Alaska and the Yukon. But in recent years, numbers have been in decline because of things like climate change, habitat degradation, and overfishing. That's why earlier this month, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and Fisheries and Oceans Canada signed a new Chinook salmon management agreement. The agreement puts a 7-year ban on Chinook harvesting on both sides of the border so stocks can rebuild.
Many times there are decisions that are made without consulting tribes.
While Alvey supports the agreement's overall goal, she says Alaskan tribes weren't consulted by the state. In the Yukon, self-governing First Nations have a major say on salmon management, but in Alaska, it's largely left up to the state.
I think we were a little disappointed that we weren't consulted on any of these areas of discussion.
So it was kind of just thrown at us, and it was it was kind of unexpected.
Rhonda Pitka is the chief of Beaver, Alaska. She has questions about a clause of the agreement, which allows both countries to provide limited ceremonial harvest opportunities at their discretion.
To me, that meant that our funeral potlatch subsistence take wouldn't be guaranteed for some of our ceremonies. So that's kind of upsetting.
The commissioner who signed the agreement on behalf of the state could not be reached for comment by deadline. However, a spokesperson for the DFO says both countries have their own ways of defining ceremonial harvest opportunities. Chief Alvey would like to see more collaboration with Alaska on salmon management. She says the time is now for everyone to work together to save the salmon.
We'd really like the wild stocks to come back and be in abundance. Whether or not that's in my lifetime or not, I don't know.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The province of British Columbia and the Haida Nation signed an Aboriginal title document years in the making last weekend. According to both parties, the ceremony on Haida Gwaii cemented the Haida Agreement into history. APTN's Lee Wilson reports.
Representatives from the province of British Columbia and the Council of Haida Nation gathered for a historic signing ceremony. Negotiations for the Haida Title Lands Agreement started more than 20 years ago. Gagwis Jason Alsop thanked everyone for coming to witness the historic day on Haida Gwaii.
It's a continuation of many years of work in our recent times since the coming of the Crown, but it's the carrying forward of our inherent Haida title that we've been passed down to us from our ancestors and the responsibility that comes with it.
The agreement will shift Crown land on the islands of Haida Gwaii back to the Haida. According to the provincial government, the transfer will be carried out in stages, but private property will not be affected, and the province will still be responsible for infrastructure and services. BC Premier David Eby says this agreement was long overdue.
What we've done here together is something that the courts have been telling governments in Canada to do for many generations now. That the provincial and federal government need to sit down with First Nations governments and recognize title.
The Haida Nation gifted Premier Eby with a blanket made by Musqueam weaver Deborah Sparrow. BC Indigenous Relations Minister Murray Rankin stressed the importance of resolving matters through negotiations.
We could have been facing each other in a courtroom. We could have been fighting for years and years, but we chose a different path. We chose a path that requires creativity and courage. And we got there together because we are trying to create a better future for our children.
The Haida and the province sat down and officially signed their agreement. Gagwis said the signing puts to rest any debate or conflict around the lands, and they can now move forward together.
So it's an important time, and it lays the foundation for a future together where we can acknowledge the truth, acknowledge the history, but also look forward to build a brighter future for the Haida Nation and the people of Haida Gwaii, and provide hope and inspiration.
BC will introduce legislation later this month to formally recognize Haida title in provincial law. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
A new program is helping Indigenous students plan for a career in healthcare. We'll have that story and more after the break. Welcome back. A new internship program in Winnipeg is giving Indigenous students hands-on experience in healthcare. Sierra Bettens has the story.
Months ago, grade 11 student Emma Bellick had her heart set on becoming a veterinarian.
But shadowing nurses in the labor and delivery ward opened her eyes to a new career path.
I was with a bunch of different nurses who were doing their 24-hour checks on the babies who were just born, and that was like really cool, and just to see all the babies was really cute. And then in the afternoon I got the chance to be in a room with a lady who was in labor.
Emma is one of several students participating in a 17-week Indigenous student work experience program at the St. Boniface Hospital. The program was spearheaded by Clayton Sandy, a St. Boniface Hospital board member and knowledge keeper at the River East Transcona School Division. Sandy says the program offers hands-on opportunities and experiences that go beyond the classroom.
I dropped in like 3 weeks ago. We have it every Tuesday, a full day, and the students were at the research lab, and they all had a tray with a heart, a pig's heart in it, and it kind of blew me away because they're all cutting it open, stuff like that, and handling it and stuff like that. And yeah, I just thought, how many students ever get an opportunity to do something like this ever?
That experience was pivotal for Matt Telenko, a grade 11 student at Murdoch McKay Collegiate who hopes to become a cardiac surgeon. He says the program has given him a clearer picture of what he wants to do in the future.
I think my favorite spot is CR5 in the Asper ward, which is post-op surgery, so right after the cardiac surgery happens. And I found that very interesting and it intrigued my interest for what I wanted to become later in the future.
By offering high schoolers on-the-job experience, Sandy hopes the program will nurture future Indigenous healthcare workers.
They're in grade 11 or 12. I'm hoping that many of them will maybe continue into post-secondary into some field that they had an experience to go into here at the hospital.
Now 2 months into the program, Emma sees tremendous value in expanding Indigenous representation in healthcare.
It can be scary for lots of Indigenous people coming here, and it's a very fast-paced environment. And if you see somebody who you can connect with or feel similar to, then I feel like it'd be more comfortable for them.
Sierra Buttons, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Canadian Association of Journalists, or the CAJ, has announced the nominees for their 2023 awards. And APTN National News and APTN Investigates received a nomination each. Brittany Guillot is nominated for her work on the Inside Correction series, 2,180 Days, where she was given special access to inmate Joey Toussaint, who spent more than 2,180 days in solitary confinement. And Sav Jones is nominated for the JHR CAJ Emerging Indigenous Journalist Award for all their work on reporting on Indigenous issues. Congrats to you both. Great news indeed. Best of luck to Brittany, Sav, and all the nominees at this year's CAJs. That's going to do it for us here this weekend. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, or subscribe to our APTN News YouTube page. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.